I've had a song in my head like all morning long. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Inner Tapestry Series. Today, we are kind of continuing the conversation from last episode. So if you have not seen the last episode, episode 17, go check it out on YouTube. It's there in the permalink. Or DM us if you can't find it. We're happy to share it with you. But we were talking all about foundational frequencies and the sort of energy limit that the human body can hold and what that means for our perception at different levels. So my plan today is to give you a super quick run through of what we talked about last time, and then we're going to dive into some deeper specifics. But for now, Red, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself?
Hello, my name is Red MoonEagle. I'm a psychic catalyst, a teacher, and a healer. And those of you who have joined us before, you know all about me. If you are just joining us, I encourage you to look at everything that we've done together. Safrianna and I have talked about so many things, and I am just so excited to be here today. It's so exciting.
So oh my goodness.
I have no control over what that is.
We were talking about this last time and cracking up because Red just, the technology responds to you and we don't know why, but it does. So funny.
It does.
So I'm Safrianna Luna, the Queer Spirit Guide. I am a licensed trauma therapist and speaker, author, CEO. I do my thing and try to help other people shine their light. And I love having these conversations because one of my missions in the world is just making information freely and readily available for those who are curious about it, which is part of why we talk about this. So in the last episode, we were talking about foundational frequencies, and I'm going to do my recap of it because I'm trying to take everything Red taught and say it to you in about 2 minutes. So again,
good luck with that.
Yes, let's see how I do. Without notes, no notes. Your foundational frequency is how much capacity your human body has to hold your multidimensional self. And you came into a frequency in this lifetime that you might have had before, or it might be your first time. You might be bouncing around on frequencies, but in each human lifetime, you have a frequency that governs some of what you receive from here and from here. So Red has used the colors to describe the frequencies as just a system to sort of order them and understand them and have a language to talk about them, but they are not actually a color. Again, just the color to use to describe sort of the system. So reds are here to use their 5 senses and have a sensory experience of being alive. They're very down to earth and they don't really get or care about this. Whatever. An orange frequency is here to experience and have that sensory experience, but they're starting to wonder what's happening up there. They are opening back up to that, and they might not really ever get to accessing that, but they're going to try to understand and access that. Yellow, which makes up 80% of the population, so most people here are yellow, are here doing karmic work. They're resolving karma, doing karmic contracts, just something with karma that they are here to explore and unpack in this lifetime. Greens are here to help those in karma, those yellows, navigate that and to help be the emotional heavy lifters and help people navigate relating and being human and communicating and all of those things. Blues are here to teach. They are here to share their knowledge and wisdom in however they can, whatever they are here to do. And in that is a drive, a very strong drive to teach and be of service through the sharing of knowledge and wisdom. And then indigos are here to remember. They're here to remind us all that we're part of a collective whole, that we are all one, and that everything can be known and remembered. And then we have violets, and violets really only last until puberty or around then, so they don't make it past childhood, but they are here as a really bright flame that inspires and catalyzes and changes the world around them in radical ways. That was maybe 2 minutes.
Wow. I wish I could do that. I feel like I needed shit. I'm gonna make sure I send everybody to you and just say, just listen to that part of the podcast because it takes me 15 minutes or 2 hours. or whatever.
This is part of why our little service package is getting your cosmic blueprint done with red, and then come to me to get it interpreted in
Yes, yes,
human language, because it's a lot. So these frequencies, these foundational frequencies, what we explored last time is that most people have one foundational frequency. So they are a red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, one of those.
yes.
But
But,
we're back
and
today because there's more.
there's always more.
So using me as an example to start, I have an overlay. So
Mhm,
I am an indigo frequency
mhm,
with a green overlay. So let's
mhm.
start there. Overlays are one of the other ways that frequencies can come through. So
Yes.
let's leap off there. What the heck is an overlay, and why do some of us have them?
So the best way to describe it is I like to use a house analogy. If I'm going to build a house, I'm going to have a foundation. I might want a concrete foundation, or I might want a lifted foundation. There's so many different kinds of foundations, but that goes with the analogy of your frequency, right? So sometimes when you have a foundation, the different kinds of foundations that you have based on kind of what you want it to look like and what you want it to feel like and what your experiences are going to be, you may want a different kind of subfloor. Um, you can tell I've been around construction people my whole life. So, like construction, it just goes there. Um, and overlays give you another layer of access, availability, and purpose written into your foundation. So, if you don't mind me sharing a little bit about how your frequencies kind of play out, just in a very generalized
Yeah.
version,
I'm an
is
book.
I know you are, but confidentiality is still, and guides will tell everything. So I'm also warning your guides, like this is a public forum here, because they like to be helpful. Um, so the indigo frequency is extraordinarily purpose driven, right? Purpose driven, you're here to do a thing. And when you encounter something that you have access to remember, you remember it and go, oh, click, that fits. Now, the green overlay is about interpersonal communication. It's about connecting us to each other and helping people come out of karma. So there is a experiential piece to greens. Greens are not like blues with the experiences, but they're their own thing. And greens will, if you have a green overlay, what that will sometimes do is cap your indigo for a while, or it's you always know you're an indigo. I don't want to say that it's never ever not there, but it can feel like there's something on top of your indigo awareness that is forcing you to experience these things, have connections, have these really rough, difficult experiences that it can feel. And I've had so many people with green overlays tell me, why is the world after me? Why can't I get it right? Why aren't people hearing me, seeing me, knowing me, connecting with me, whatever their internal shadow language is? And that green will amplify your shadow, and it will literally, that frequency forces you to be with people in a way that you learn from them. It makes the indigo slow down and be with people in the connection, because indigos generally kind of don't. I don't care what their bio number is. Indigos have a tendency to get very myopic. I always think of the Cyclops image, the eye in the middle of the head and the eye, there are no eyes. That is an indigo in so many ways. And that is not a bad thing, because they're here to do a thing. There's no judgment in that statement. But those overlays, no matter where you are in the frequency paradigm, your overlays help you. They help you with something specific that you wanted to achieve, go for, learn, unwind, pick a thing.
I'm sure I wouldn't have become a teacher or a therapist if I didn't have my green overlay. I would have been like,
Correct.
screw that. We're not doing the interpersonal thing. We're just like the way
Yes.
I would have driven towards my mission would have been entirely different.
Yes. And the other thing about overlays is that occasionally the overlay is extraordinarily what I would call like thick, right? Like a really good solid subfloor. But then over time, it kind of dissolves, right? It doesn't go away completely, but it does become less of that cap. And and this is the thing that I've had a lot of questions on over the years. They're like, well, I'm only a yellow, or I'm only a red, or I'm only a green, or whatever it is. I'm like, there is no only with vibrational frequency. So even with an overlay, there's no, well, I only had access to my green during this time in my life. Oh, no, 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 that never goes away. Nope, sorry. Nope. when you That's why foundation frequency is so important to explain and make sure people understand. It is your foundation. It's not like all of a sudden one day your foundation disappears and you're floating in the middle of nowhere. That's not a thing.
And I don't know if we've ever described this before, but or I'm sure you probably have, but am I correct in thinking like your foundational frequency is the floor, and then the walls of the building are your bio number? They're your body sort of that's
Yes.
containing everything within. But that
Yes.
foundation, you can't build the bio number without determining first, okay, well, we're going to be a green, so we're going to pack this much of the awareness into the body, and now we're selecting the walls that are going to contain everything.
Yes. Yes. And that might be, and there are things that are confusing to people in the world, and null, void, dark entities are part of that. And I had a huge conversation yesterday. So if we get to that today, great. But that is something to understand in the paradigm, but we should answer the other questions. I know you have a list of them.
So we have overlay. That is one way that this can work. And I remember you've talked about transitional frequencies before, where people are like they're both like side by side too, and they sort of slide up and down the spectrum. So
yes. So there's a couple different ways transitions present. You can have someone that, when I look at their blueprint, they're clearly a green, right? But I can see the threads of blue beginning, right? Where it hasn't showed up right now in their life yet, but it will. Like those blue threads are gonna come out. Now, how do I know that? Because they show up. Do I have a time? Who the hell knows? A lot of it depends on people's choices in their life, where they are in their blueprint, like if they're ready. You can have glimmers of those threads show up at different points in time. And then you have another kind of transition, which is a little bit more intense. So say, going back to the green, it can be green with a blue overlay, but clearly those threads are really thick. They're starting to get robust. And boy, that blue stuff kind of comes out randomly almost. And they pop out of that green fixation and go into a place of, now I have to teach everything I just learned type thing. Green blues that are what I would call kind of that, I think of, what are those things called? The fruit roll-ups. Remember when they had the two blendy pieces?
like they'd ombre together.
Yes, ombre, thank you. And they had the commercials, because I remember this, I'm old. The commercials would like dance right together, and they fold like a ribbon. That is very much how it manifests in people's lives. That ombre blendy, but yet you have a solid green in one end and you have a solid blue on the other end. And that kind of transition is really dynamic. There are transitions I've met that want it to stop. And it doesn't ever. I mean, their whole life is that way. And it's a choice. And when they start embracing the dynamic and the excitement and all the lessons, they do much better. But while they're in that place of oblivion and not realizing what's happening, oh my goodness, it can be rough, especially when they're kids. Especially the green-blue transition specifically. That's the one that I'm thinking of. And then you can have at the other end of that spectrum, you can have more of the blue showing up with fewer of the greens. And it's not linear. And that's the part about transitions that's really hard for people to understand. They're like, well, I was a green when I was a kid and I was a blue when I was an adult. That's not the way it works. There is nothing linear about vibrational frequencies. It's very always dynamic, it's always changing, it's always morphing with your choices and where you are in your blueprint. One of the things that transitional frequencies, I mean, one of the most amazing things that it's taught me is that those that are in a solid frequency do have a totally different perspective of life compared to those that have that transition, because the transition forces the blueprint to be dynamic. If we go back to the house analogy, it's kind of like building your house on top of a spider's back. Like, it never stands still. It's constantly
Howl's
moving.
Moving
Your
Castle.
foundation. Yeah, thank you. That's even a better one. It's a very dynamic foundation. I was actually thinking mortal engines as well, like the big houses all on those big machines. Like, that's what it can feel like to those people in their life. So if it stops for just a minute, it can feel like, oh my God, this what everybody else experiences? Can I have more of that? And then it switches. It switches so fast. Transitions can be, for a long time I used the word flippity floppity. And you've met them. We've all met them. We've met people that are so dynamic and so flippity floppity that in mental health, they are vilified. They are talked down to. They're heavily medicated. I'm not saying medication is not a good thing. It can be a very good thing. I'm not saying that every single person who has these characteristics has a transition. And I have met some that, because of their transitional frequency and because the world around them cannot cope, they can't cope, they don't know what's going on. It can look very much like there's a weird dynamic. Somebody's jabbing them with a cattle prod every 5 minutes, and they're just hopping. They're a human ping pong ball.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm listening to this description of the transitions versus the overlay, because I'm an overlay, and I know for me, I'm like almost always in my overlay relating to other people. Like, I just
Yes.
relate to other people through my overlay. But if you start to really ask me for what I really think and you go deep with me, the indigo's right there. But I
Yes.
feel it. I know I can feel the flip flop, and it's
Yes.
not all the time. It's like I have
No.
both all the time. But with what I'm forwarding with, I kind of get to choose. Sometimes I don't get to choose the indigo. The indigo comes bursting
Oh
bursting
yeah.
out.
Oh yeah.
But then I'm thinking of, the transition frequencies. I teach a lot about human sexuality and gender identity, right? And all
Yes.
of that exists on a spectrum. We might feel
Oh yeah.
really feminine, and then we might feel agender neutral, and then the next day we're feeling really feminine again. And like, we can
Mm-hmm.
kind of do this, and maybe we dress different, but for a frequency that's transitioning, like, they're doing this, and maybe they're doing this, and then they're doing this, and then they're here again, and then they're literally doing this. And if they're not aware that that is happening, like, I can look back knowing that I have this overlay now and go,
Right.
oh. But
Yes.
that was not as like wild of a slip and slide ride as a transition person would be. And I could
Yes.
see that internally being what I call crazy making.
Oh yeah.
Just like
100%.
feeling confused and out of sorts, and like, where, who am I? What am I? What's happening?
Yeah. And there's one particular person that I'm thinking of that is a bio number 4 and really held on to some very rigid blue frequency. It was kept trying to hold on to the blue parts, and the harder they grabbed and the more they were trying to ignore the bio number 4 with the green, the more chaotic and unhappy. And the discussion we had about that transition was always like, well, when am I going to transition out? When am I going to just be a blue? And I'm like, well, today you're a little bit more blue. Or, this afternoon you kind of switched into the green. And they're like, I know. And I never took offense to the snapping and the hurt. Like I could hear it, I could see it, I couldn't feel it because I'm not an empath and they were, but definitely like those transition frequencies are tricky. They make wonderful friends, dynamic friends. You're never going to be bored. You're often going to be baffled and triggered. So, part of transitions, it doesn't matter where you're transitioning, whether you transition from yellow to green or green to yellow, or and nothing is linear. So, it's not like you're going to go red to orange to orange to yellow to green. That's not how this works. There's too much variety. But whatever those transitions are, when you have that grouping of type of transitions, um, they are very easily triggering to those that are in one vibrational frequency. And I think that's by design. Nobody's ever told me, but I can extrapolate based on experiences.
Yeah. So what is the difference between, because you mentioned threads, and I
Ah,
know that
yes.
some people have, yes, there's okay, so we have overlay, it's like a shell.
Mm-hmm.
Then we have transition, it's like a spectrum that you're sliding up and
Mm-hmm.
down on. And then there are threads where it's like you have your one, maybe you have an overlay with that, and then you can also have threads of color
Threads.
frequencies that reach out.
Right. So I often use in general this description. So for example, we'll just use our lovely yellows because there's so many of them. And you can have a yellow who is kind of a stuck in a spiral, really sticky place, can't seem to get out of it, kind of oblivious that they're in it, but they may have gone this journey before. And they may put in their foundation these marker threads of, hey, you don't have to do this quite so hard this time. And those threads will be very specific to the experience that they processed the last time and gives them an out, gives them a clear, hey, I really don't have to be here again, right? And it will be so dynamically, vibrantly different, those threads, to help them stop that spiral or give them the opportunity to stop the spiral, right? And we never do it with just our frequency. We always put people in our lives. We always put circumstances that help us go, hey, I don't have to do this again. So it's never just that. But those threads can be very dynamic in your foundational frequency because they are the foundation. It's not like they're something you're gonna miss. They are obvious different frequency stop signs, basically. They're not really stop signs, but they're instead of a 55-mile-an-hour sign going down the road, this one is the size of one of those green like highway, off ramp signs, and it says, "Hey, pay attention to me. Slow down to 35 and think about this." Right? So that's what those threads are often put in our blueprints for. Um, Now, sometimes, so I'll use a particular example I'm thinking of. There is I saw a blueprint once where the foundational frequency was blue, and they had these very interesting wider threads of indigo that would kind of just show up. But then there would be these pillars, these threaded pillars of orange. And it looks like it's a block of orange that blocks everything else out. And when this person and I were talking, I was describing everything, and I was like, okay, so you're blue, and you have these little interesting indigo things, but then you have these like orange things in there. And I was describing, kind of how these things interplay, experiencing, wanting to teach, and then the remembering piece, like knowing when they came across something and it was a truth, right? Truth with a capital T. Oh yeah, I remember that. And then sometimes there was these gaps where nothing made sense. They'd go to a workshop or they would go to work, and that week everything was hard, right? Like, I don't get it. I don't understand it. I know something's happening. Please explain this to me. And as though their senses, their gifts, this person was empathic, it was as though they were getting all the emotion from what was around them, but it wasn't translating anymore. It's like all of a sudden the translator turned off. And they were just so frustrated. It had happened so many times that they were thinking that maybe they were like not grounded or not plugged into the universe right. And they'd seen counselors and they'd seen spiritualists and psychics to ask, like, what's happening to me? Why is it on sometimes? What's it off? I was like, oh, no, you're not crazy. That's actually happening. And it's these pause, they had built in these orange spots to have pause points to make them stop and process in a new way, because that blue was the foundation. And blues often feel very, well, they feel it and they appear that from the outside to be compulsive sharers.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean they actually understand what it is that they're compulsively sharing. So it was fascinating. Once she knew that, she was able to come back after about 6-8 months and go, I figured it out. And it was a magnificent like journey of discovery. So those threads show up very interestingly. They're threaded in. Sometimes there's a lot of them when you're younger. Sometimes there's a lot of them in the middle. Sometimes you don't see them until later. Most people have threads, but they don't always show up for me to see them until they're there.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm wondering, because I'm thinking of some particular people's blueprints as well. Is there any difference between a thread? I'm going to use a word that there is a distinct difference, but I'm wondering if
Mhm.
in frequencies this exists. A chord. So a thread being like, I have these little mile markers that remind me of past experiences so I can draw on those and maybe avoid those pitfalls. Like I know somebody who is a green with a blue who has yellow threads, and those yellow
Yes.
threads help their mission of doing karmic work because they
Yes.
remember what it looks like. But then
Yes.
there's also getting swept up in other people's junk, especially like for greens, blues, indigos who aren't here doing the karma thing. But can they accrue karma? Can they get courted into karma? Can they get
That is a good question. Okay, so red, orange, green, blue, indigo, violet. They are all here to help those in yellow. Period. That's their job. Now, they do it a lot of different ways, but there is no vibrational frequency that's here to help that's going to be able to avoid the yellows. Okay? You can't do it.
when it's
Don't try.
80% of the population? Don't try.
And I cannot tell you how many times I have encountered people who are like, well, I want to keep my vibration pure. So I'm just going to avoid those people that can't deal with their karma. I'm like, you're going to find that not going to work, because your blueprint will drive you to do the thing your blueprint is here to do. Like, it's part of you. You wrote it. You wrote the book. You can't, I mean, unless you completely get off blueprint, totally different conversation, you can't not follow your blueprint. Now, this is the part that really screws with people's heads, to answer your question. I know that there are life themes that are very tricky to rationalize to our good people, bad people, good and evil, dark and light, right and wrong tendency to box things. Okay. Now, I will use a general mix match story of about 17 different people to make a story. Okay. So green, we'll just say this green entity, this green foundational person has come here and they were born into a family of all yellows, and there's a null void in the family, and that person kind of floats around on the outside. But their whole family alcoholism, some drug abuse. They've got some physical violence, some sexual molestation. If you pick a thing, there's a bad thing. And when they were young, their cousin was murdered by a child kidnapper. Like, think of the worst possible family you could think of, and all of the bad things have happened to them. And this green entity, this green vibrational frequency person, went down the rabbit hole. They tried all the drugs. They got hooked on alcohol, went through Alcoholics Anonymous to get clean. They ended up in jail. They stole some things. They went bankrupt. Like, all the things that you could have seems to be following the person, right? And anytime some counselor or outside entity would say, well, maybe you shouldn't associate with your family. Maybe you should cut them off. You know, you're clearly trying to do better. Why would you keep going back to that family? Why would you keep giving them your time? Why would you keep, right? Because what our therapy counseling stuff says is you have to learn to take care of yourself before you can take care of others, which is an antithesis to a green. They do not get that. Just FYI, you're speaking up and croaking up the wrong tree. They have a really hard time with that. And that's okay. I mean, this is the thing. We want to judge them for it. We want to say, well, they're just not getting it. They're just not trying. They're just not disassociating with their family. They do well and then they fall down the wagon again. That's our judgment. And we got to face that, because they are driven to be here to fulfill the contracts of helping that family of yellows. They're here to do a thing. And they do it through interpersonal communication and through experiential experiences in the ditch with all those people that are in karma. Okay? So it is very hard for people to understand when I say that it is extraordinarily rare for a green to actually hold on to that karma, because the whole time it's happening, you can hear them. They give themselves away. I love how people give themselves away. They give their frequency away all the time, because a green will say, I know that this is hurting me. I know that I've done this because my mom does this, and I want to help her. Now that I know how to get out of it, I want to help her get out of it. They will say things like that, and people dismiss it. People are like, oh, well, that's toxic helping. Well, yeah, it is. I'm not saying it's not. But the drive of the green to help mom is on that subconscious consciousness, really. It's like an unconscious consciousness awareness of their purpose. Mm-hmm. So yeah, they may become homeless. They may steal. They may hurt people. They may hurt other family members as they're working through the experience that says, I don't want to do this. I don't like this. Why am I doing it? Now that I figured out how to get out of it, I want to help everybody else that's in it. If you listen to them, they'll say that. And they are driven to go back to family over and over and over if they have contracts. Now, this is where it gets confusing for greens sometimes, because sometimes greens aren't contracted with the family that's kind of screwed up, or the family's normal. The family is normal. Oh my gosh. How many times have I met greens where there's nothing wrong with dad? There's nothing wrong with mom. Like, there's nothing there. And if you look at mom and dad, they're like blues and indigos or whatever, like they're here to do their thing. But that green breaks away from the healthy family and goes beelining like a heat-seeking missile for the most damaged family they can attach themselves to. Yeah. And everybody's standing around going, did they get hit in the head sometime? Yeah. Like, what the hell happened? No. There's a purpose, right? Like, it's not as random as you think. And it's extraordinarily rare for reds, oranges, greens, blues, indigos, and violets to, when we pass, right, like we shuck the shell and go home, it's extraordinarily rare for us to hold on to the shit that didn't belong to us. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that while we're here, we're not accruing a little bit, because we're trying it on. We're like, how do I do that? How are you humans doing that? How are you people in karma doing that? I would like to understand so that I can help you not do that. How do we not do that?
I'm so curious because 80% of us are here doing the karmic thing. How does
Yep.
one then accrue karma? How does one end up in a
Oh,
yellow life?
oh, I wish I had all the answers to that. I really do. But I think that it comes down to who you are as an entity and how you have experienced your meat suit life. So I have seen so many past lives that are attached to blueprints where the lives are, and I'm not empathic, but when I pick up on those past life things, I get hit with all the emotions. It's a very strange thing for me because I don't get emotions from anything else. So it's this bizarre inundation of shame, fear, terror, not disappointment. Ironically, I don't think I've ever experienced a karmic past life that someone's trying to unwind that disappointment's involved. But shame, fear, rage, there's a whole bunch of uh, emotions that are definitely in that fear range, and they're all over the place. And when we accrue karma, I like to use like the car accident analogy because I think it's like the best. You're driving down the road and you're driving behind somebody and you come to a stop sign and that person goes forward, right? Like you look up, they're going forward, and then you kind of space out for a second and they put their brakes on and you bump them. You don't you hit it, you hit your brakes, you don't crash, but there's a bump. Bump. Okay. We've all had a few interesting little like, oh, hopefully, and you don't even get a scratch on your car, right? No car is injured in this. Okay. But the person in front of you emerges from that car with an exponentially irrational explosion of a reaction, right? And they run back to your car, they're beating on your window, they are calling you names. Now you have a choice. You can roll down the window and you can engage. You can get out of your car and become entangled in that reaction. You have a lot of choices, right? Choice number one, you don't roll down your window, you just stare at them. Well, that's interesting. Didn't expect that. Interesting. Go into your glove compartment, you pull out your insurance stuff, you lay it up against the window, and you hope they take a picture while you're calling on your cell phone the police because this person just might kill you if you roll down the window, right? Like you're not real sure. So that's one way to respond. That is the least karmically accruing, basically. Okay. The next analogy is you don't roll down the window, but you're rattled, you're upset, you take on some of that upsetness. Shame. I'm ashamed that I hit them. I am disappointed in myself that I did that. And now I've got to worry about how the cops are going to, maybe the cops are going to believe them and they're not going to believe me. And you end up with a little bit of a worry fear spiral, right? And then you take that home with you for the rest of the day. And it takes you 3 or 4 days to kind of go, okay, that was not my thing. I can let that go. That's taking on a little bit of karma, but letting it go later, right? Like you held on to it, you experienced it, tasted it, and went, that doesn't taste good. Bleh, I want that to go away. Okay. Now that next layer, right? You roll down the window. You roll down the window and you engage. You defend yourself. You hold your power. And while you're doing that, you're taking in what's being thrust at you. You're getting entrapped in that karmic experience. Cops come, he gets a ticket, you get a ticket, everybody gets a ticket, you go home, you're mad about it, you think it's unjust, you end up in the courtroom, he ends up yelling at you again, you have to pay some fines, and for 6 years later, somebody mentions the tail ending and it all comes back again, right? That's another way of accruing karma. It might take you 30 years, 50 years. Maybe you never truly forgive and let it go. And it's you not forgiving them. You're forgiving yourself for getting entangled. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Next level, right? Next level is you get out of your car. Oh, fuck no. They are not going to get me. I'm going to
Seen this
defend my
happen lots of
car.
times.
Right? I'm going to defend my car. I'm going to defend my right to be in the world. And you go out there and he punches you and you punch him. And next thing you know, you're rolling around on the ground and somebody's got a broken nose and the cops come and there's people on the sidelines and everybody's gotten entangled in the thing. And next thing you know, somebody shot somebody. Oh my God, now we've got an injured person. Do you see the magnitude of your choices? And then you end up in jail overnight. So you end up punished for your engagement. And then you punish yourself. Well, I didn't do anything wrong. I only hit them. They went out. It's their fault. And then that guy that shot that other guy, well, that wasn't my fault either. And do you see? Do you see where the karma is?
Mm-hmm.
And you spend the next 5 years angry, resentful, ashamed, not dealing with your shit, but then that spirals into more interactions. Maybe you start driving recklessly. Maybe you lose your license because you start drinking. Do you see where the human experience has so many choices that you can go down the holy shit, I'm going to accrue karma and more karma and more karma and more karma and more karma to the point where I'm not allowed to drive. Now I'm walking everywhere and or I run into somebody with my bicycle because, I was drinking and bicycling and it's not my fault. The world's out to get me. I'm going to go eat worms. Maybe you end up with diabetes because you're drinking because of that car accident and now you can't walk at all. Well, that wasn't, it all started with the car accident. Do you see what I mean? Karma is not complex. It's really not. But you have to recognize your choices at every intersection. Every single intersection has a choice. And it is never without another entity involved. No karma can be accrued if there is not an entity involved.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense to me. What came to mind to simplify that is ownership. If we take ownership for what's ours and what we're doing and our actions and our thoughts and our everything,
Yes.
then we're not really going to accrue karma because ownership means, oh, I own that I hurt you and I'm not going to do it again because I've taken ownership for having done that and I know its impact. So now I'm not going to keep doing it. Like true ownership is that
Yes.
internal, I forgive myself for this. I see the impact. I'm not going to do it anymore.
Yes. And not owning someone else's karma.
Yes. My owning of my stuff, not yours.
And that is part of where entangled karma happens and why you end up lives where you're not just working on your karma, you're trying to untangle what is your karma and what is somebody else's karma. And that is difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't pretend that it's easy. And I've worked with so many people that are working on karma. I mean, you can't avoid it. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
And it, in my opinion, is beautiful. I love it. I love to help people go, see how light that is now? That feels so good.
Yeah.
And you can see the release. It does happen. And it never happens in a big chunk. It's not a chunky thing. It's little tiny pieces a little along the way. It's very much pebbling, one pebble at a time.
Yeah. I mean, I keep coming back to this conversation in every conversation recently, which is that the nervous system cannot make a rapid change without actually ingraining the original response even deeper. So yeah, if we were to try and shed all the karma at once, we're just gonna end up with more. A lot more like that. It has to be one little thing at a time.
I used to use this analogy and I still think it's probably my favorite is like rubber bands. All those threads of karma are like rubber bands. And if you cut them slowly into tiny little pieces and you let them go, they release. But if you try to throw the rubber band out, it's still tied to you. It just snaps the fuck back and hits you in the head, and then you got a headache. And there's a real physiological thing with that.
Yeah, I'm unsurprised given the intersection of the wheel and how the body is also doing the emotional and the spiritual and the intellectual and, all of these pieces, which brings me back to, you had brought up earlier, null voids, and how does that fit into all of this?
Null voids are everywhere in every culture, every mythos, every shaman, medicine person, spiritual, whatever, religion, pick a thing. We all know they're there. And null voids have a lot of different ways that they manifest to create fuckery. That's what I like to say. So we have all of our frequencies, but the most vulnerable are our yellows, because when they're caught in karma, the worst entangled karma you can be in, they get trapped in their own circle. They just go around and around and around. Those of us from the outside looking in go, how do you not know that you've done that before? And they look at you really, truly oblivious, going, what are you talking about? Okay. I know I've been here before. Like, I'm not dumb, and I have a really good memory. And we've been here 15 times now, and you still can't see it. Karma. Okay. Breathe, right? But what happens, to answer your question of how someone gets to null void, null voids get off blueprint. That's all it is. Now, it's scary though, right? Because I've had some people come at me, they're like, well, there wasn't anything in that body. I'm like, probably a null void. And they're like, but I didn't feel evil. I'm like, because they're not evil. They're not bad. There is really no evil. And I won't go down that line today, but null voids are not evil, but they are off blueprint. So the body that they inhabit, they're not really in it, for lack of a better term. They're like beside themselves. When I see them, it very much looks like the human body is walking around and they are outside of themselves. There's like a shadow, a dark something next to them. They're not in their own body. Okay? Now, they create fuckery. That's just what they do, because they're off their blueprint. There seems to be an undercurrent. I've had so many guides explain this to me, and I still don't really understand it. So I will admit that I'm just going to tell you what they say, because it confuses me. What the null void's reality seems to be is that if they get somebody to join them in the darkness, they won't be alone in the darkness. But that's not how it works. Then you have one entity in darkness and you have another entity in the darkness, and they can't even see each other. What is that? I don't know what that is.
It's your hand signals. There's something with your hand signals that makes things respond.
Oh my God. I need to learn what they are. Anyway, there is no, they can't recognize each other. Two null voids don't recognize each other. It's not like, oh, the null void says, oh, you're another null void, I can see you. No, they don't.
They're not squadding up to take over the world out there.
No, they will gravitate to each other, but not with awareness that that's what it is. They have no awareness other than they're in the dark. When I talk about like looking at something and everything's such vivid and colorful and beautiful, and there's multidimensional hues and threads and guides, and it's just such a rich, beautiful awareness, they have the complete opposite. They live in a shadowed world. Now, I'm not talking about color blindness. Please don't go there. I had somebody ask me that question. No, it's not color blindness. It's not shades of gray. I know people who are beautiful light entities that are living in color blindness where it is shades of gray, but their soul is not dark. Dark entities, null voids, live in darkness. They know what darkness is from the inside out because they cannot get to the light, which is not a true statement. All they have to do is turn around. All they have to do is turn around and embrace their blueprint. That's it. They will no longer be in the dark. But you can't tell them that because they don't believe it's there.
Right.
When they got off their blueprint, they got so far into the karma that they couldn't find their way out of the swirl, so they didn't want to do it anymore. And rather than embrace the light, they stepped off the blueprint.
So
Okay?
just to ask this question, because I'm sure other people are wondering it too. So could, let's say, a blue end up making some really bad choices along the way and end up a null void? No, it's just
No.
yellows who end up in this spin.
I have never had a guide. I've actually had that question come a couple times, and guides are always halfway before you even finish the question. They're all saying,
Like,
nope, 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 nope. Like there's no like, if you find an indigo that goes and does something really terrible and awful, I promise you it was part of their blueprint.
huh.
Don't know why, but I do know why. There's a reason. Like they were driven to do the thing, probably because there was a contract with the other souls involved in the terrible thing. Because indigos will do shit that don't make sense because it's under that guise of indigos will sacrifice. They will do stuff that is really awful. And yet it's because of contracts. They don't accrue karma because they know they're here to do the contract.
Mm-hmm.
If you talk to an indigo, and I will use an actual example, I had I've had several conversations with a particular person who's no longer in this world, but they were in a prison, and I went to visit them because of some volunteering that I was doing, and I had a conversation with somebody. I was nervous. I didn't know this person. I talked to them the first time because this person had done some awful things. Like we won't go into the awful things. Beautiful indigo soul. Beautiful indigo soul. And I was confused. I didn't expect that. It was a lesson for me, right? Like here, my guys are like, and here, this is an indigo. Here, go talk to them, right? And the messaging that I got out of that after these beautiful conversations with this person was that they felt compelled to do the things they did. And when it was done and they were put in prison, they knew their purpose was complete. And within 3 or 4 years of going to prison, they ended up with cancer and they were dying. That's when I met them. And they were like, I've forgiven myself and I've forgiven all of my victims. I've forgiven myself. I've let it go. I've let it go to God. Not as an excuse, not as a like, God's going to wash me clean type thing. He was genuinely aware because I'm curious. I'm asking all the hard questions, right? And the answers were very indigo answers. Like, I don't know what his natural bio number was at the time. I mean, I still couldn't even tell you for the life of me. Could have been anything. But there's an awareness when indigos do really bad things that there is an unconscious consciousness, conscious unconsciousness towards the end where it bubbles up and they have to go through the releasing process and the recognition. And sometimes it's 2 minutes before they die. Sometimes it's months before they die. This guy did some pretty awful things, There's more conscious release at the end. But this entity did not accrue karma from the sacrifice of what they did, the awful things they did. I'm not excusing it, neither did he. But he did recognize there was something else going on there.
That's fascinating.
It's really not what people think sometimes. And that's where you have to be curious and open to understanding that what we think of as right and wrong, good and bad, the laws of light, are more complex than we want them to be, and yet quite simple. Indigos are here to do a job, and they do it sometimes through extreme sacrifice. What do you think sacrifice is? Giving up your job? Maybe your sacrifice is staining your soul and then going through the process of forgiving your soul.
Mm.
I don't know. To me, that's kind of a really awful sacrifice.
That is, I mean, it would be a huge sacrifice for me to do something like super heinous. Like, yes, I've hurt
Right.
people and I've wronged people and I've offended people and all of that, but like
Yes.
something deliberately, intentionally, impulsively heinous, yeah, that would be a huge sacrifice on me, the being.
Yes.
Like, because I would have to sit with that. So I imagine that this person, being an indigo, had that like remembrance of probably impact in there that is, and that again, it like goes back to this ownership piece.
Yes.
And can we take ownership? As you were talking about the null void, I teach this infinity loop. There's the light and the shadow. This side's going to represent shadow right now. So
Yes.
really all a null void is doing is this. It sounds like
Yes.
they're so stuck on this side that they don't
Yes.
have any access into the light side.
No.
Versus if they were willing, able, could perceive, oh, there's an exit here. I can
Yes.
start going with the flow again. And none of us, karmic or not, like none of us are actually cut off from any of that.
No.
That's what we're supposed to be
No.
doing is this. We're supposed to be
Which is
flowing.
which is why when I mention null voids, a lot of people are like, oh, those are the evil people. Those are the people that are going to jail and becoming famous Jeffrey Dahmers. And I'm like, actually, they're not. They create fuckery everywhere they go, but they're going to do it in a way where they do not get attention. They're not going to be in the news. They're not going to be famous. They're going to encourage people who already have bad spiral behaviors, attitudes, mental conditions. So, for example, they'll be attached to, say, you got somebody who's a yellow who's trapped in this karmic loop and they drink occasionally. They're not an alcoholic. A null void will attach themselves to that person and encourage them to continue going into the dark, continue the drinking till it does become an addiction. Like they will encourage, it's like the person in the car accident analogy. They're the ones on the sidelines egging it on.
I'm thinking of the little angel and devil on the shoulder, like not evil and bad and wrong, but just the little voice that's like, do it.
Yes.
Do the thing that's gonna hurt. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I've definitely known
And
people like that.
yes. And null voids don't like to be around those who are aware that they are null voids. They will avoid them with a absolute unconscious compulsion. I've been at like fairs, I've been out in the world, and a null void, because I can see them, to me they're like everybody else. They just are. And I'm always fascinated, so I'm always watching them because I'm always a little I really am. I'm always a little bit fascinated and curious. And as soon as they notice that I'm seeing them, they leave. Like like they turn around in the middle of what they're doing, drop everything and leave. Like, running! Don't see me! I don't want you to see that I'm in the darkness. Please do not shine your light on me.
Yes.
Do not shine your light on me. I cannot handle it.
Yeah. Do greens often find themselves trying to help null voids?
Oh God, yes. They're like bees to honey. And I think a lot of it, well, there's a couple things that happen. So you can have indigos, blues, greens, some oranges. I haven't seen any reds do this, but I'm not saying it can't happen. Again, all those vibrational frequencies that are not yellow. If they notice a null void, they may not know consciously that that's what it is, but they really want that entity to come into the light because they're so lonely and you can feel that, and it's so sad. I don't get the feeling part, but I get the sadness part. Like,
Yes.
I feel the grief sadness that if you could just turn into the light, please join me in the party. And so greens, because they're here to help those in karma, they will inadvertently sometimes, when they encounter them, they'll spend a little extra time trying to figure it out. Like, what's going on with this? Why are they not getting it? And also, why will they not let me look at them? Why will they not let me be with them? Like, that person is uncomfortable in their skin, literally, when I'm trying to give them light, right?
Yeah.
It's a very interesting thing. And if a green has enough yellow overlays, depending on how they've written their blueprint, they can kind of get entangled in with a yellow null void kind of triangulation. Um, but they usually at some point realize that there's something really wrong with this that is not fixable. And they will detangle eventually, most of the time. I don't think I've met a green yet that stayed trapped, for lack of a better word, because they can feel that darkness and it doesn't feel good. A green doesn't like that feeling. When they're experiencing awful things, they still know they're in the light, if that's a better way of
This,
explaining it.
right? Like,
Yeah,
oh, I'm in the dark, but I'm soon enough, I'm going to swing right back
right,
out.
right,
It's okay.
right. And null voids will make anybody who's aware they're a null void uncomfortable. I have a client who she has had a few null void encounters, and she's an indigo, and it confuses her every single time. She's like, "There's nothing in it. There's nothing in the body. I don't understand. It just feels absent." And she was reading some kind of weird conspiracy theory where somebody was talking about NPCs, like people walking around in bodies that are part of the Matrix. And I'm like, I'm not saying you're not picking up on something. You could have encountered a null void, but they aren't as common as you think. So it's not like they're every 10th person you meet. Not
the
a thing.
NPC thing is literally chronic dissociation. Go
Yes.
walk through a Walmart. The
Right?
level of suffering and pain in the world right now puts a damper on our ability to be present in the body. But yes, there is a difference between that sort of like just dazed walking through life versus that like there is something with this person, they're so off because like the darkness surrounding them. It's like the bottom pit of depression. Like the bottom pit of depression.
Yeah.
Like the
and
only
null voids will not suicide. Yeah, null voids won't suicide because they're already in the dark.
That's interesting.
But they will push people to suicide if they think it will help them join them in the dark, which, by the way, I've never met anybody who went to suicide that worked. They always go into the light. Just FYI. Not a thing. I haven't seen it yet. I mean, doesn't mean it can't happen. I just haven't seen it yet so far. And with my line of work, I've run into it a few times. So just FYI. Yeah. It's very interesting how null voids are so insidiously creating fuckery everywhere they go. And people want them to be evil. I'm like, they're not, though. They're just lost. They do create fuckery. I can't say it's easy. And yes, they do create fuckery everywhere they go. And it makes everything ass over tea kettle. And it's hard to figure out what's in front and behind of something else. But they're just lost. And they do come through in a couple different ways. And this might be maybe a topic for another conversation, but how they manifest can be confusing too. And it creates like these really weird fear paradigms in religion and spiritual circles. And I mean, it's definitely one of those topics where I've gotten phone calls. I'm like, it's probably a null void, or it's not a null void. And somebody just is making bad choices. Like it just.
Yeah, I mean, there are people that are just assholes because, I mean,
they're
karma,
assholes.
but they're like,
karma.
You know, doing their thing, but like semi-present versus that, like I'm hearing that's, again, it's like everything just got turned down to practically zero except the fuckery dial, which went to the top.
Yep.
And everything's just kind of like chaos and they're stuck over here in just this little loop versus like, I mean, I know plenty of jerks, right, who are probably here doing the karma thing, but
probably
they're still riding into that light. Like they still have access to their guides. They still have access to, you know, other tools. They're not just creating chaos. But yeah, you know, all of this, I'm glad you're speaking on this not evil piece. And I definitely think we could do more of an episode on null void and whatnot if we wanted to, but everything stems back on this 3D plane to trauma. So there are no evil people, there are traumatized people. And
Yes.
trauma makes us go off blueprint. Trauma makes us question our sanity. It makes us wonder if we want to be here. It makes us do all kinds of things.
I want to caveat because I've had I've had people where I I'm actually much more careful when I talk about null voids now, because if somebody's caught in karma and they're already in a fear spiral and you say, be careful, don't get off blueprint, they panic. I cannot tell you how many calls I get from previous clients who are going through a bad thing, or somebody calls me and says, I think my sister went off blueprint, um, the universe will conspire to the nth degree to keep you on your blueprint. Like, you really have to jump ship. And jumping ship really means disconnecting from your blueprint. You disconnect from your vibrational frequency. You disconnect from your purpose, your life themes. I have never had anybody approach me to get identified for their bio number who's a null void. I suspect, but I don't know, that there's a disconnection between their blueprint and their bio number. I can't imagine that would function well.
Right. I mean, the blueprint is being brought into manifestation through the meat suit, which is the
Yes,
bio number.
yes,
So it makes sense if you are disconnected from your blueprint, you're not really going to be interested at all in what the body is here for, or
no,
the purpose or the meaning or the mission
no.
or any of that. So,
You know, the null voids that I have had moments to watch them, because they really don't like me watching them. It does not take them long for me to notice that I'm watching them, and they just run away. So I don't get a lot of I don't get a lot of opportunity to observe them, which is a little irritating because I'm kind of curious. Um, it's also not my job apparently to save them, so my guides keep telling me, quit poking the puppies. They can't help it; they have their own helpers. But I'm curious. Um, that they're not well. Like, the physical body is gray. I do not know how to explain it. It's like, maybe it's because the shadow is so obviously beside them that that's what I'm seeing. But I did have somebody who has a family member who um, was born into the family, null void, and I knew it. I had done a session with them. They were like, oh, that makes so much sense in my family. It also makes sense why I'm in the family, vibrational frequency, to kind of like help all those, to keep them from continuing in the spiral. And they brought me a picture, and I have no better way of describing it. This person had a gray countenance, even in the picture. It was not as drastic as like looking at a color picture and then looking at a black and white picture. It wasn't like that. But there was a grayer tone, washed out flavor to the body. And when I asked the client that I was sitting with, like, what do you see? Right? And they're like, that's really interesting. This person seems very washed out to me. They always have been, even since they were a kiddo, kind of like no color, no like vibrancy. And I'm like, okay, I'm not imagining it, right? But that client is also agreeing. So I also don't know how to compare, like, what does a yellow see from a null void? I have no idea,
oh, so
because
many
we've
things
never
to
had that
study.
conversation.
There's so much data to collect. Oh my gosh. Well, I think that there's definitely more of a conversation to have here, because I think that there's just a larger conversation about the good versus evil
Yeah.
and right versus wrong and, black and white thinking that I'm so here to stop from continuing to happen, because it's way more holistic and slippy slidey than that, to go back to the transitions, right? Like, yeah, we all make some poor choices. Some of us make a lot of not great
Oh,
and
yeah,
not healthy choices, but like,
absolutely.
but it is this again spectrum, and it all for the most part stems back to trauma. So I hope this was a fascinating conversation for those of you who tuned in and that you learned something because again, this is like for me it's a remembrance, it's a getting the pieces back together again, and I imagine for someone that this is entirely new to, they're like, what the heck?
What the
But
hell?
hopefully it's a good primer, and as always we're here to answer questions if you have
Yeah.
specifics.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that I just want people to know out there that it took me a long time and a lot of conversations with people and a lot of watching and finding people that could say it back to me so I could figure out how to clarify it because it's something that's just there to me. And when you add a whole bunch of fear paradigms and you add like, because I get this all the time, like so it's my astrology sign. Nope, that has nothing to do with this. Or it's my human design. Nope, that doesn't have anything to do with this either. Or it's this, or it's that, or it's this, or it's that. And I'm like, no, it's its own thing. I mean, if you go back and look at all the frequencies, and I know that you know this, and we've had these conversations with fives and sevens, bio number fives and bio number sevens, is that you can understand where it got tangled along the way.
Mm-hmm.
You can understand where this has been with us the whole time, but we've labeled it something else or got it tangled in with something else or labeled something with fear or laid something with judgment. And if 80% of the population are in karma, and we're all here to help those in karma, we want to make something land with those in karma so that they can understand it. And that's when we have these enmeshed paradigms that continue to reinforce the separateness instead of the togetherness. And I just want to untangle that so that we can just actually get our work done. That's all I want.
That's the goal, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, well, right there is a few more topics for us to cover in upcoming episodes. We are on every 2 weeks
Yep.
at this time. So if you want to catch us live, we are here. Otherwise, our replays are always available. So feel free to watch them again and digest and come up with questions because we are so here to answer those questions and just have open conversations and share knowledge. So, oh, glad you got something out of that slink. So until next time, my friends, I'm Safrianna Luna. This is my dear friend Red, and we will be back to